Flight attendant kicks poor woman off plane, regrets it when she returns as an investor. Welcome everyone. Today's story takes flight on a journey filled with tension, surprises, and a hefty dose of poetic justice. Imagine you're boarding a plane, lugging your carry-on through the narrow aisle, feeling a blend of excitement and exhaustion. Suddenly, an altercation erupts, one with far-reaching consequences for both passenger and flight attendant. What appears to be a routine travel day squabble quickly spirals into a conflict that tests moral boundaries and reveals hidden layers of class prejudice. Unknown to everyone on board, the seeds of karmic retribution are already sprouting. Buckle up and prepare for a tale of unexpected twists, immediate payback, and heartfelt redemption. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. Morgan Reeves carefully adjusted her navy blue Delta Airlines neck scarf as she prepared to greet passengers on flight DL-943 from LaGuardia Airport to San Francisco International. She brushed an invisible wrinkle from her pristine skirt, mentally reviewing the day's schedule. The flight was nearly at capacity, but Morgan still felt a jolt of satisfaction whenever she saw a long line of passengers waiting to board. More passengers meant more opportunities for tips, compliments, and even the occasional phone number from an admirer in first class. Morgan had been a flight attendant for 3 years, having joined with high hopes of traveling the globe. Over time, she discovered that the job was not all glitz and glamour. Often, it was filled with the mundane, handing out tiny bags of pretzels, calming nervous flyers, and fielding passenger complaints about overhead bin space. But Morgan believed in maintaining a certain image. She liked to project a polished, worldly air, especially to travelers she deemed important. That morning, her co-worker, a jovial attendant named Trish, was assigned to first class, while Morgan took charge of the main cabin. The arrangement slightly annoyed Morgan. She preferred the prestige of first class, where she could hobnob with business magnates and celebrities. Still, Morgan plastered a smile on her face as the first wave of passengers began to shuffle onto the Boeing 737. Families with young children came in, juggling strollers and diaper bags. A group of college students lugged backpacks, stuffed to capacity. A businessman, barking into his phone, nearly knocked someone's carry-on. Amid this chaos, Morgan's eyes were drawn to a young woman who boarded hesitantly, holding a tattered canvas tote. The woman wore worn-out sneakers and a second-hand jacket that had clearly seen better days. Her hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and her shoulders slumped, as though she carried a weight that went far beyond her luggage. Morgan watched the young woman. Her name tag read Lisa Wright on a small paper slip attached to her plastic boarding pass, cover fumbling with her seat assignment. Lisa was in Group 5, the very last boarding group, and had snagged a middle seat near the back. Her eyes darted anxiously, as if worried she might do something wrong. When Lisa approached row 26, she found a tall man already splayed out in the aisle seat, a laptop open on his tray. Awkwardly, she tried to inch past him. Excuse me, sir," she said. "That's my seat in the middle." He barely acknowledged her, raising his knees slightly to let her through. Lisa pressed herself close to the seat backs, trying not to bump him. Finally, she settled in, her tote bag crammed under the seat in front of her, and exhaled shakily. From her vantage point in the aisle, Morgan took in the scene. Something about Lisa's posture, equal parts anxiety and shame, rubbed Morgan the wrong way. People who looked that defeated often caused problems. Maybe they asked for special accommodations, or maybe they struggled to pay for checked baggage. Perhaps they demanded freebies. Morgan had seen it all. As she continued her standard announcements, Morgan's attention kept drifting back to Lisa. The woman hardly said a word, but her downtrodden appearance made Morgan's mind spin with assumptions. She found herself judging Lisa as someone who probably scraped together pennies just to buy the cheapest fare. In Morgan's eyes, that spelled trouble people on shoestring budgets often ended up causing disruptions or complaining about every little inconvenience. Morgan took a deep breath, trying to maintain her professional exterior. She had no inkling that her snap judgment would soon set a series of unexpected events into motion, culminating in immediate and dramatic karma. The aircraft doors closed, and the captain's voice boomed over the intercom, welcoming everyone aboard. After the safety demonstration, Morgan began the in-flight service. She maneuvered the beverage cart down the narrow aisle, distributing drinks and snacks. As she approached row 26, she heard a timid voice. "Excuse me." She glanced down to see Lisa peering up at her. "Yes, can I help you?" Morgan asked, forcing a polite tone. Lisa hesitated, glancing at the man next to her, who was now dozing with his laptop precariously perched on his knee. "Actually, my seatbelt seems stuck. I tried to pull it out, but it won't extend any further. Could you?" Morgan cut her off with a clipped nod. She reached down, yanked the belt, and found that it was indeed tangled. With an annoyed grunt, she freed the strap. "There," she said curtly, handing it to Lisa. "You're all set." Lisa murmured a thanks, her cheeks flushing. Morgan continued down the aisle, rolling her eyes. The request was minor, but it fed into Morgan's internal narrative that Lisa was more work than other passengers. She passed out the remaining drinks with mechanical efficiency, trying not to let her mood sour further. About half an hour into the flight, turbulence began to rock the plane. Overhead, bins rattled, and the captain instructed everyone to remain seated with seatbelts fastened. Morgan strapped herself into her jump seat, scanning the cabin for any sign of panic. Across the aisle, a child squealed in fear, and a mother tried to comfort him. It was then that Morgan noticed Lisa frantically pressing the flight attendant call button. The seatbelt sign was on, so Morgan had no choice but to remain seated until the captain signaled it was safe to move about. Lisa pressed the button repeatedly, her eyes darting toward Morgan. After the plane steadied a bit, Morgan unbuckled and made her way down the aisle. "Yes?" she asked, her frustration bubbling beneath the surface. Lisa's face was pale, and she clutched the armrests. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I really need to use the restroom. I have an upset stomach." Morgan glanced at the seatbelt sign, which was still illuminated. "MAAM, the sign is on. You need to remain in your seat." Lisa twisted her fingers together, looking more miserable by the second. "I understand, but I'm really not feeling well. It's urgent, please." Morgan sucked in a breath, weighing the risk. The turbulence had subsided, but the sign hadn't yet been turned off by the captain. She remembered company policy forbidding passengers to walk in the aisles when the sign was lit, except in dire emergencies. She studied Lisa, trying to gauge whether the woman was truly in distress or just being dramatic. Finally, Morgan sighed. "All right, but be quick and careful," she said quietly, stepping aside. She kept her voice low, not wanting to draw attention to herself in case the other flight attendants or the captain saw her letting a passenger roam while the sign was still on. Lisa nodded gratefully and hurried toward the rear lavatory. Morgan returned to her jump seat, her heart pounding with annoyance and a trace of worry. She braced for the possibility of another bout of turbulence. Minutes ticked by, and Lisa still hadn't returned. Morgan began to fume. Is she just loitering in there? After a few more minutes, Morgan decided she couldn't let this slide. She unbuckled and stalked toward the back of the plane, ignoring the curious stares from other passengers. She rapped on the lavatory door, trying to keep her voice low. "Monsieur A.M., are you all right in there?" No response. A spark of alarm coursed through Morgan. She knocked again, louder. This time, Lisa's faint voice answered, I'm not feeling well. I'm sorry. I need another minute. Morgan frowned, crossing her arms. She was about to respond when the plane lurched again with a new wave of turbulence. Her stomach twisted with fear and annoyance. She pictured the fiasco if Lisa fell or was injured while in the lavatory. Morgan again rapped on the door, her voice sharper now. You need to come out. This is unsafe. Lisa emerged after a few tense seconds, looking clammy and disheveled. Her posture was hunched in embarrassment. I'm sorry, she repeated, and it sounded like she was on the verge of tears. Morgan sniffed. Please return to your seat immediately. She escorted Lisa back to row 26. By then, the turbulence had rattled more than just the overhead bins. It had frayed Morgan's patience and thoroughly embarrassed Lisa. Morgan had no clue that her mounting frustration would soon converge with an entirely different conflict, setting the stage for an explosive showdown and immediate karma. As the flight continued, the turbulence eventually subsided, and the captain turned off the seatbelt sign. Relief washed over everyone. Morgan resumed her rounds, collecting trash and offering extra beverages. When she reached row 26 this time, she noticed that the man seated on Lisa's aisle was awake and fidgeting, occasionally stealing irritated glances at Lisa. Midway through passing out additional pretzels, Morgan heard the man speak up sharply. Hey, flight attendant, Morgan stiffened. She disliked being summoned in such a dismissive manner, but she put on her professional smile. How can I help you? The man jabbed a thumb toward Lisa. This lady keeps shifting around and bumping me. It's making it impossible to work on my laptop. Can you ask her to keep still? Lisa looked mortified, turning even paler. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm really trying. I'm not feeling well, and the seat is cramped. Morgan's eyes flitted between them. She could sense the tension crackling. She leaned in toward Lisa. Ma'am, we need you to respect your fellow passengers' space. If you can't remain seated without disturbing others, I might have to see if there's another seat available. Lisa's eyes shone with embarrassment, but she nodded vigorously. Of course, I'll just try to keep to myself. Morgan continued her duties, yet she felt a simmering annoyance at Lisa. She convinced herself that this particular passenger was a magnet for drama, the seatbelt issue, the urgent bathroom visit, and now complaints from a seatmate. Even if Lisa wasn't deliberately causing trouble, Morgan believed she should just endure the flight quietly, like everyone else. Things quieted for the next hour. Passengers watched the in-flight entertainment. Some dozed off, while others read magazines. Lisa remained in her seat, eyes closed, occasionally wincing as though fighting off nausea. Morgan was grateful for the respite until a new issue arose. An older passenger in row 28 began coughing incessantly, triggering the call button. Morgan arrived to find the woman short of breath. She immediately fetched a bottle of water and signaled a passing co-worker for assistance. They administered an oxygen mask and checked if the passenger had any pre-existing conditions. The pilot was informed, and talk of a possible diversion surfaced. While Morgan and the other attendants managed the medical situation, Lisa rose from her seat. She approached tentatively, looking concerned. Is there anything I can do to help? I took a CPR class recently. Morgan whirled around, face tight. Please sit down, ma'am. We have this under control. Lisa backed away, murmuring an apology. It seemed that every time she tried to be helpful, she only succeeded in irritating Morgan. The older woman's coughing spell eventually subsided, and the crisis was averted without an emergency landing. The cabin erupted in relieved chatter, with many praising the flight attendant's quick thinking. As Morgan tidied up the area near row 28, she overheard two passengers whispering about Lisa. Did you see her jump up? She seemed worried. I wonder why that attendant was so brusque with her. Girl was just trying to help. Morgan felt a twinge of self-consciousness, but she buried it. She told herself that she'd done the right thing. Passenger safety came first, and untrained individuals meddling with a medical situation could complicate matters. Shortly after, Morgan spotted Lisa near the rear of the plane, rummaging through her tote bag. The suspicion flared up again in Morgan's mind. What is she doing? She marched down the aisle and found Lisa pulling out a small plastic container with a few crackers. Lisa looked up in alarm, quickly zipping her tote. The entire scene rubbed Morgan the wrong way, though. Logically, there was nothing unusual about a passenger grabbing a snack. Still, Morgan's stress from the earlier medical scare and her annoyance with Lisa's repeated seat and bathroom issues boiled over. "Ma'am, I need you to stay seated and stop milling around. If you have a concern, ring the call button." Lisa clutched her container of crackers. "I'm sorry, I was feeling nauseous and needed something to settle my stomach." Morgan put a hand on her hip. "I understand, but this back and forth is disruptive. Please, for the sake of the crew and the other passengers, remain in your seat unless it's truly urgent." Lisa swallowed, blinking back tears. "Yes, I understand." Morgan turned on her heel and returned to her duties, convinced that Lisa was single-handedly making this flight more difficult than it needed to be. What she didn't realize was how quickly a final incident would ignite a confrontation, one that would drastically reshape both her and Lisa's destinies once the wheels touched the ground. The final straw came about 30 minutes before landing. The captain announced they'd be descending soon into San Francisco. Morgan prepared for the final cabin check, ensuring tray tables were stowed and seats were in their upright positions. When Morgan reached row 26, she noticed the aisle seat man was again on his laptop. Ignoring the captain's announcement to power down large electronics, she reminded him to shut it off. With a heavy sigh, he complied. Lisa, meanwhile, looked on edge, twisting in her seat as though trying to peer out the window, which was partially blocked by another passenger's shoulder. The seatbelt sign dinged on, signaling everyone to remain seated for landing. Morgan meticulously scanned the rows. Suddenly, she saw Lisa do the unthinkable. The young woman unbuckled her belt and started to rise. Rummaging in the overhead bin, Morgan's pulse spiked. "Ma'am, sit down immediately," she barked. Lisa froze, her hands on a small grey carry-on bag. "I'm sorry, I realized I left my medication in here, and I need it for—" "Sit down now," Morgan repeated, raising her voice. The stress of the flight had worn her patience thin. She reached Lisa in a few swift strides, practically slamming the overhead bin shut. The surrounding passengers gawked as Morgan gripped Lisa's elbow, guiding her firmly into the seat. "What is wrong with you? The seatbelt sign is on. You can't just disregard safety procedures." Humiliated, Lisa's cheeks flushed bright red. "I truly am sorry," she whispered, tears threatening to spill. "I get panic attacks, and I need my prescription to calm me." "Landing triggers it sometimes." Morgan held up a hand. "That's enough. You've been causing disruptions this entire flight. First the bathroom fiasco, then rummaging around while we're dealing with a medical emergency. Now this. I'm sorry, but you've put yourself and others at risk one time too many." I wasn't trying to put anyone at risk," Lisa pleaded, voice trembling. "I was just trying to avoid a panic attack." Morgan let out a sharp breath. She felt the eyes of multiple passengers on her, but she was too exasperated to soften her stance. "If you can't follow airline regulations, you shouldn't fly. Once we land, we're going to have a serious discussion with security." The plane began its final descent. Cabin lights dimmed slightly, and flight attendants strapped into their jump seats for landing. Lisa sank lower, tears wetting the corners of her eyes as she stared at the seat in front of her. She clutched the armrests, trembling not just from her untreated anxiety, but from the sheer embarrassment of being chastised so publicly. Morgan exhaled heavily as she strapped herself in. She tried to refocus on the standard landing protocol, head back, seatbelt tight, eyes forward. Yet she felt a kernel of unease sprout in her chest. Had she gone too far? The woman was obviously distressed, but Morgan's own frustration had overshadowed any empathy. She pushed the thought aside, reassuring herself that she was upholding safety standards and that Lisa's repeated slip-ups couldn't be excused. The wheels screeched against the runway, and the plane rumbled to a stop at San Francisco International Airport. The moment the seatbelt sign turned off, Morgan unbuckled and prepared for the final passenger deplaning. But as the cabin door opened, two airport security officers stepped on board, summoned by Morgan's earlier call. She pointed them toward Lisa, who sat hunched in her seat, tears streaking her cheeks. A jolt of guilt twisted Morgan's stomach, but she maintained a stern expression. The officers approached Lisa. "Ma'am, can you come with us, please?" Lisa nodded mutely, standing on shaky legs. She grabbed her tote, and with one final glance at Morgan, filled with equal parts hurt and confusion, she exited the aircraft under the officer's watchful eyes. Morgan felt a fleeting pang of regret, but she reminded herself that Lisa had repeatedly disregarded safety rules. Sometimes strict action was necessary. Little did she know just how drastically this action would backfire. The seeds of karma had been planted, and they would soon sprout in an explosive fashion, sending Morgan's carefully ordered world into a tailspin. That evening, after the flight crew checked into their hotel in San Francisco, Morgan relaxed in the lobby lounge, nursing a latte as the city's lights sparkled beyond the glass walls. Trish joined her, dropping onto the cushioned seat with a sigh. "Long day," Trish murmured, stretching her arms. Especially with that medical scare mid-flight. Morgan shrugged, sipping her coffee. At least everything turned out okay, except for that Lisa woman. She was trouble from the get-go. I had no choice but to involve security. Trish frowned. I saw bits and pieces of what happened. She seemed distressed, not malicious. Kicking her off the flight, Morgan cut in. She wasn't forcibly removed mid-flight, Trish. I just had security talk to her when we landed. She needed a firm reminder that safety procedures are not optional. Trish watched her friend with a contemplative gaze. "Morgan, we deal with anxious passengers all the time. I don't recall you being so harsh before." Morgan bristled. "I wasn't harsh. She was a disruption." End of story. Her curt tone halted the conversation. Trish shrugged, sensing Morgan's defensiveness. "I need to crash for the night. Early flight tomorrow." She rose and offered Morgan a small wave before heading to the elevator. Alone in the quiet lounge, Morgan tried to relax, but her thoughts kept drifting to Lisa's tearful face. She recalled the whispered thanks when Morgan freed her stuck seatbelt, and the frightened expression when Lisa had needed the bathroom so urgently. The more Morgan mulled over it, the more she felt an uneasy twinge. Had she let her frustration and bias overshadow any compassion? She shook off the doubt. After all, she told herself, the captain and the airline had policies in place for good reason. Lisa broke those rules repeatedly. That was that. Morgan refused to feel guilty over a situation in which she believed she was in the right. However, the next morning brought a ripple of consequences Morgan hadn't anticipated. When she checked her phone at breakfast, she discovered a flurry of messages from crew members. Rumors circulated that the incident with Lisa had been filmed by another passenger and posted online. The video snippet showed Lisa, looking desperate, being confronted by Morgan and later escorted off by airport security. The caption read, "Poor woman kicked off plane for needing her medication." Morgan's heart sank. She scrolled through outraged comments accusing the airline of cruelty, urging a boycott, demanding Morgan's job. She swallowed hard, feeling her stomach knot. This can't be happening. She was certain the video was out of context. Nonetheless, it was already racking up views and vitriol. The world, it seemed, had already condemned her. Her phone buzzed again this time, a call from her supervisor. Morgan took a shaky breath and answered. The supervisor's voice was tense, cutting straight to the point. "Morgan, the airline's PR department is all over this. We need to get your side of the story immediately." There's talk of an internal review. Morgan's hand tightened around her phone. But I was following procedure. Just get here, as soon as you can, the supervisor said, then hung up. A cold sweat broke across Morgan's brow as she hurried back to her room. She had done what she believed was right, yet the internet's court of public opinion had another verdict. Morgan felt cornered, anxious about her career, her reputation, and the potential fallout from a single flight that had snowballed into a viral fiasco. She was about to discover that the backlash was only the beginning. The immediate karma she had unknowingly sown was poised to hit her like a bolt from the blue. A week later, Morgan found herself back at Delta's corporate offices in Atlanta. She wore a conservative blazer, her hair pulled into a tight bun, an attempt to project professionalism. She sat in a glass-walled conference room, waiting for the internal review panel to begin their meeting. Her supervisor, Carol Nguyen, arrived with a solemn expression. "Morgan, the video is still everywhere," Carol said quietly, taking a seat across the table. "We've released a statement about flight safety regulations, but the public doesn't seem appeased." Morgan swallowed. "I was doing my job." Carol exhaled. "I believe you, but the airline's image is at stake." That woman, Lisa Wright, told reporters she was humiliated and threatened with arrest for simply needing her medication. According to her, you repeatedly targeted her due to her poor appearance. The media is spinning it as a class prejudice story. Morgan's face heated. "That's ridiculous. I never singled her out for being poor." She was ignoring safety rules. The door opened, admitting 3 members of the panel. They wore matching, serious expressions, each with a stack of documents in hand. They introduced themselves with clipped politeness. Then the questioning began. They asked Morgan to recount the event in detail from the moment Lisa boarded to the final confrontation. Morgan tried to remain calm, explaining the seatbelt complications, the bathroom incident during Turbulence, the rummaging in the overhead bin during final descent. She insisted she had no personal grudge against Lisa, that it was purely about enforcing regulations. One of the panelists, a tall woman with wire-rimmed glasses, tapped a pen against the table. "The passenger states she alerted you to her anxiety condition and the need for medication. Did you ever check if she had a medical alert card, or did you attempt to accommodate her in a safer manner?" Morgan faltered. She only mentioned the medication at the last minute, during descent. The seatbelt sign was on. There wasn't much time for alternative arrangements." The panelists exchanged glances. Carol cleared her throat, stepping in. "Obviously, there's been a tragic mismatch of communication. Safety is paramount, but so is sensitivity to medical needs." A heavy pause followed, thick with implication. Morgan could almost feel the weight of the airline's displeasure. Finally, the tall panelist said, "We'll continue our review. Morgan, you're on paid administrative leave until we finalize our findings. We'll inform you of any disciplinary action." Morgan felt as though the floor had crumbled beneath her. "I understand," she said softly. She gathered her bag and walked out with Carol, who gave her a sympathetic pat on the shoulder. Outside, the Atlanta heat pressed down on Morgan. She realized she had no immediate duties, no flights, no sense of normalcy. Her career, which she'd so carefully built, hung in the balance. How did everything go so wrong so quickly? Morgan had no inkling that events were still unfolding in a way she couldn't predict. Far from being over, the story would soon twist again, especially when she learned the true identity of the woman she'd scorned. The next shock would come from none other than Lisa Wright herself, in a role that would stun Morgan and the entire airline. During her involuntary leave, Morgan spent her days in a tense limbo. She tried to distract herself by visiting local museums, organizing her apartment, and browsing job boards just in case her flight attendant career crashed. Yet every day, the memory of that flight and the viral video burned in her mind. Friends and family texted her, either to express support or to ask if the rumors were true. Morgan felt as though she were living under a storm cloud, uncertain when or if she'd see sunlight again. One afternoon, Carol called unexpectedly. "Morgan, you need to come to the Delta Executive Suite tomorrow at 10 in the morning," she said. Her voice subdued, but urgent. "There's a meeting with a major investor group. The airline wants you there for complicated reasons." Morgan's heart hammered. "What does an investor meeting have to do with me?" Carol sighed. "Lisa Wright is involved." Morgan nearly dropped her phone. "Lisa? The passenger from that flight? Wait, what do you mean she's involved?" "Her name is all over the documents. Apparently, she's part of an investment consortium that's negotiating a new partnership with Delta. We can't ignore that she's had a very public incident with us. The executives want to address it head-on. Look, Morgan, just come and be prepared. That's all I can say." Morgan spent the night in restless anxiety. Lisa is an investor? That made no sense. Lisa had appeared so impoverished, rummaging through a shabby tote, wearing worn-out sneakers. Yet the next morning, Morgan found herself standing in a sleek conference room on the top floor of Delta's corporate tower, surrounded by airline executives in tailored suits. They murmured among themselves, glancing at Morgan every so often. Then the elevator doors slid open, and in walked Lisa Wright. Except she appeared completely transformed, her hair carefully styled, her attire a polished business dress and heels. Gone was the timid slump. Instead, she carried herself with a quiet confidence. The subtle lines of exhaustion still lingered around her eyes, but otherwise she looked every bit like a successful business professional. She was accompanied by 3 other individuals in suits, presumably fellow members of her consortium. Morgan stared, stunned. Her mind couldn't reconcile the image of the anxious, pleading passenger with the poised investor striding across the polished floors. The airline's CEO stepped forward, greeting Lisa warmly. He gestured to Morgan. "Miss Wright, this is Morgan Reeves, our flight attendant at the center of the regrettable flight incident." Lisa's eyes flickered over Morgan, her expression inscrutable. "Yes, we've met." Her voice was calm, a far cry from the tremulous whispers on the airplane. Morgan's mouth felt dry. She scrambled for the right words to apologize, explain, or something. Before she could speak, the CEO cleared his throat. "Miss Wright and her team are considering a significant investment in Delta, particularly in our new line of community-focused flights to underserved regions. But they wanted to address certain concerns first, given the viral story." One of Lisa's associates, a silver-haired man, said, "We want to ensure Delta is committed to fair and empathetic treatment of all passengers regardless of appearance, wealth, or circumstances." Morgan's cheeks flamed. She knew precisely where this was headed. She cast a helpless look at Carol, who gave her a subtle nod to proceed. Summoning her courage, Morgan faced Lisa. "Miss Wright, I'm truly sorry for how I handled things on that flight. I acted out of frustration and fear of safety violations, but I see now that I could have been more understanding. I hope you can forgive me." Lisa's gaze lingered on Morgan for a long moment. Finally, she spoke, her tone even. "A single apology doesn't erase the distress I felt that day. I was ill, anxious, and not looking my best because I'd spent most of my money caring for a sick relative. The flight was crucial. I was needed in San Francisco to finalize some documents for this investment deal. Yet, in a moment of vulnerability, I felt humiliated and judged." Morgan swallowed hard. She wanted to melt into the floor. Lisa continued, turning to the CEO. "My consortium is still interested in partnering with Delta. However, we want assurances that your cabin crews receive better training in handling medical and mental health situations." We want to see a stronger commitment to compassion, especially for passengers who may not appear affluent. The CEO nodded vigorously, promising reforms and additional training. Morgan realized Lisa was using her leverage to effect real change, not to exact personal revenge. It was simultaneously humbling and awe-inspiring. The meeting wrapped up with the promise of a forthcoming official statement. As people dispersed, Lisa lingered near Morgan, who braced herself for a final confrontation. Instead, Lisa extended her hand. "I hope you learn from this," she said quietly, "because it could have been prevented with a little empathy." Morgan gripped her hand, speechless. A wave of relief and regret washed through her. She realized in that moment that Lisa wasn't just a random passenger. She was a person who had faced more struggles than Morgan could possibly know, yet who had risen to become a force capable of guiding the future of an airline. Following the dramatic showdown in the executive suite, Morgan expected to be immediately fired. After all, she had become a public relations liability and a personal embarrassment, singled out by a crucial new investor. But to her surprise, the airline opted for a different course. The official statement, jointly crafted by Delta and Lisa's consortium, outlined new policies for handling passenger medication, mental health concerns, and staff training. Morgan was not named specifically, but everyone internally knew she was the catalyst. Carol called Morgan into her office a few days later. "The decision has been made," Carol said. "We're not terminating you. However, you'll be required to undergo extensive retraining, focusing on empathy, mental health awareness, and conflict escalation. Furthermore, you'll be on probation for 6 months. Morgan nodded, too stunned to speak. On one hand, she felt fortunate to keep her job. On the other, she realized she was now the poster child for flight attendant negligence. "I understand. Thank you for giving me a chance to improve." Carol studied her. "For what it's worth, I think you've learned a lot. And Miss Wright, she specifically requested that you stay on if you're willing to grow from this." Morgan's eyes widened. "Lisa asked for that?" Carol nodded. "She wants to see real change, not just punishment." With a lump in her throat, Morgan left Carol's office, reflecting on Lisa's surprising grace. Despite everything Lisa had endured, she was giving Morgan space to redeem herself. A swirl of emotions overtook Morgan: gratitude, humility, and a renewed sense of responsibility. She vowed to approach every passenger henceforth with compassion first, procedure second. The immediate karma had arrived swiftly. Morgan's actions triggered a viral video, threatened her career, and forced her into a public reckoning. Yet, ironically, it also became the vehicle for Morgan's metamorphosis. Over the next few weeks, she attended specialized training sessions, learning how to recognize signs of anxiety, how to politely but firmly enforce safety rules without humiliating passengers, and how to handle medical or mental health emergencies with genuine care. She practiced role-playing scenarios, faced her own biases, and listened to stories from travelers who'd felt judged based on their appearance. In the final session, the instructor screened a short video about empathy in the aviation industry. It highlighted real incidents, some tragic, some heartwarming, to show the ripple effects of how one moment of kindness or cruelty could reverberate far beyond a single flight. Morgan's eyes welled up as she recalled Lisa's tear-stricken face that day. She realized that in her quest for a perfect, hassle-free cabin, she'd forgotten that passengers were human beings with invisible burdens and private sorrows. Lisa could have been anyone: a single parent with no childcare, a caregiver for an ill family member, or even someone about to sign a major business deal while fighting crippling anxiety. 6 months later, Morgan completed her probation successfully. She never forgot the feeling of dread as she faced the review panel, nor the jarring realization that a poor woman she'd belittled was in fact a powerful investor with the capacity to shape entire airlines. The immediate karma had taught her that wealth or status can be deceiving, and that empathy was a far more valuable currency than any first-class passenger's tip. Eventually, Morgan received an unexpected envelope at her home. Inside was a simple note on embossed stationery. "Morgan, thank you for accepting the lessons life offered. Keep growing and keep caring." Lisa Wright Morgan held the note close, tears in her eyes. She understood that true regret could be a path to redemption so long as she never forgot the day she kicked a poor passenger off a plane, only to discover that she'd actually expelled a person of remarkable strength, compassion, and influence. In that single flight, Morgan had lost her pride but gained a deeper sense of humanity. And for that, she was eternally grateful. Thank you for embarking on this emotional journey with us. We've witnessed how preconceived notions and a moment of impatience led to a life-altering lesson in empathy. From the turbulence in the cabin to the turmoil of viral backlash, and finally to the poignant realization that appearances can be misleading, our story underscores the transformative power of kindness. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about the importance of compassion and the unexpected ways life can turn the tables, please remember to click like, share it with friends who may need a reminder of humanity's better side, and subscribe to this channel for more captivating tales that linger in your heart.